As you begin this new year, we want to share with you some helpful information about what you can begin to plan for as you prepare to consider closing, extending, or what to do next after the long-term recovery group has met its objective in all of your respective areas. Even while in the throes of helping survivors of winter storms, tornadoes, which we've just seen this season already, hurricane, floods, or other disasters, it is never too early for a long-term recovery group to start thinking about what it will do after it has closed its last case. Among other things, a little foresight can make the final evaluation easier to conduct and must keep information easy to assemble. But before we get started on our objective for today, let me share with you some housekeeping details and information about who we are as Church World Service. Again, if I did not introduce myself, I am Sandra Kennedy-Owes, an emergency response specialist for Church World Service, and I will be your presenter for today. We have a few housekeeping details for you. You are muted, but you can ask questions by typing them into the question box at the right side of your panel. We will answer questions at the appropriate time that has been assigned and at the end of the presentation. But please take an opportunity to ask us plenty of questions during this presentation. This presentation will be recorded and will be available for you on our website within 48 hours. This is a quick introduction of Church World Service, as we're called CWS. Church World Service was founded in 1946. Our mission is to end hunger and poverty and to promote peace and justice. We're supported by 37 United States-based member communions. Church World Service feeds the hungry, provides clean water, reduces vulnerability, and helps those forced from their homes. With more than 1,000 employees across 5 global regions, CWS operates programs in more than 30 countries. Listed here are the domestic emergency response staff for CWS and how to contact us and where to find our webinar resources. Again, just a reminder as what Church World Service does. We support the fight against hunger and poverty around the world. We provide material assistance and long-term recovery help to communities impacted by disaster. We assist refugees and other displaced people. Other immigration legal counsel we offer. And we advocate strongly for peace and justice. This map outlines the regions of our domestic response. Barry Shade, our Associate Director for Domestic Response, covers Hawaii and the Pacific Territories. Suzanne Gilmore has the regions shaded in blue. Myself, Sandra Kennedy-Owes, covers all of the states marked in red. And all of the states that you see marked in green were our former colleagues, Regent Joanne Hale, who passed suddenly. We're monitoring and covering the areas as needed until a final decision of the replacement going forward will be made. Our U.S. Emergency Response Program in particular focuses on serving vulnerable individuals and families through a multifaceted training and education program. including on-site and webinar-based instructions. We also coordinate directly with federal, state, and local agencies, bringing together community and government resources to help ensure that everyone has a chance to recover. We provide material goods as listed above immediately following a disaster if needed and requested. Following a disaster, after the initial stages of rescue and relief efforts, many communities find there's still a long way to go to find new normal in their communities. And because of this, we offer the following trainings. Recovery Tools and Training is a one-day workshop that's led by a CWS disaster specialist and leaders from our member denominations and other groups. It provides information to assist the long-term recovery organizations and to understand the efforts necessary to lead a community in arriving at a new normal. We also can design specific training as the community requires. CWS does not have a cookie-cutter approach to training and education, but certainly we will design educational and training opportunities that meet the unique needs and desires of a particular community. Recognizing that no one workshop or curriculum can cover all of the aspects of long-term recovery or address every issue, the CWS disaster specialists are available to communities by phone, emails, and we will return to your community to answer questions, provide guidance, and assist with other unanticipated needs. Our more than 6 decades of experience proves that those with the least means have the hardest time recovering from disasters. And that's why CWS disaster response activities in the United States focus on the most vulnerable individuals and families. Early response and sustainability grants are available to local long-term recovery groups to assist with the initial task of organizing and staffing or to sustain the efforts over the long term. While many organizations are willing to finance direct aid to people affected by disaster, CWS is unique in targeting its grants to organizational needs. These grants range from $3,000 to $5,000. This sums up a general overview of who we are and the services we provide. If you have any questions or need additional information, please feel free to contact the emergency response specialist in your area, or any of us. We'll be glad to assist you. Now today, we want to provide long-term recovery group leadership and others with an overview of steps to take toward the closure and wrap-up of recovery efforts in their communities, and also to share some options to continue strengthening their communities through disaster preparedness and building resiliency. The information shared today centers around the following items. Planning and conducting a final evaluation of the group's work, maintaining and securing appropriate materials, closing cases and or transferring or referring to other agencies, completing a financial audit and inventory of the tools and equipment, compiling and distributing a final report to key audiences. We recognize that your groups are at different stages in your recovery effort, but all groups will close down sooner or later, either because of lack of funding or because they have concluded their work. This webinar will also discuss options for the group beyond the current disaster. These include maintaining the long-term recovery group, or as we call it, the LTRG, for a future disaster, transitioning to a mitigation organization, transitioning to a local volunteer or community organization active in disaster, as we call them, the VOADs or the COADs, or to do disaster preparation and training, or simply saying at the end of the day, mission accomplished, and totally closing the organization. This is how things may have looked. In reviewing what happened in whether it was 2011, 2012, 2013, 2014, or now we see some disasters occurring in 2015, or even before that. Whether it was Hurricane Isaac, Superstorm Sandy in New York, New Jersey, West Virginia, Connecticut, the tornadoes in Arkansas, Mississippi, flooding in Alabama, Florida, Michigan, the California earthquakes, and any of your disasters. And as you began your recovery efforts, you could and did convince others that the work has just begun. These are some pictures from the tornadoes in Oklahoma. Or others that may look like this. We recognize that no two disasters are alike. The impact on the community is different, but planning efforts can be similar, although the needs are unique. This was the intent and the goal of all of you coming together as long-term recovery groups. And that is that the long-term recovery actually following a disaster is the process by which a community comes together to find and use the resources of survivors, the community, government programs, and the assistance of other partners to address the needs of affected individuals and families, focusing especially on the most vulnerable so they may sustain their physical, social, economic, and spiritual well-being. As you reflect, this was what the intent was and still is in those of you who are starting out new. Yes, the long-term recovery groups have been hard at work. As a part of the long-term recovery organization, you managed to piece together the case management. You established good volunteer and construction management. You raised some funds and collected some usable in-kind donations. You communicated with all the various stakeholders. So when the people within the community think about the disaster and how far the community has come, they realize the work the LTRG has done and how much better their community is because of that work. And they envision more work still to be done. Take a moment and reflect on your status and where, if you are involved in an LTRG, you are now in the process. Can you visualize the progress? Are there new normals? Visually, how does the community look? We would assume that those of you who have been on this road for more than 2 years probably see a lot of progress. Maybe not the same progress as those who are getting really into the process, now in Florida, Michigan, California? Where are you now? Reviewing a common rule applied to the length of long-term recovery, let's determine if that rule helped in your planning. Remember when you first began to organize, this graph may have been shown to you. The rule of tens is a very general estimation that can vary greatly depending upon the type of disaster and the resiliency of the community. However, the rule of tens can give you a starting point to see approximately how long the recovery process may take. Take the number of days that the community was working on rescue or is working on rescue. Multiply that by 10 to get the rough length of the relief phase. During this phase, everyone is or was working hard to ensure the survivors are safe, being fed, that they're provided shelter, clothing, and other necessary items. Now multiply that number by another 10 to get a rough estimate of the number of days to recovery. Graphed here are 10 days, 2 days, and 7 days of the initial rescue phase. You'll find in the darker blue area you can see the relief phase, and finally in the teal the estimated time for recovery. If we apply this rule to the recent Superstorm Sandy, from our sources rescue lasted roughly 21 days. That brings us to 210 days. Multiplied by another 10 brings us to 2,100 days, which is nearly 6 years until recovery will be completed. Hopefully this fits in with what your estimation of the recovery efforts are for your area. So given this rule in your particular disaster, we ask you to ask yourself again, where are you now? Are you ready for closure? Do you think it's time to plan to close your recovery operation? Is the answer true or false? If the answer is true, or when you get to that point, let's look at some steps you need to consider when moving forward. How does the long-term recovery group know when it's finished with this work? If one or more of the following indicators is present, the LTRG may be ready to transition to the future. All the cases have been worked on and are closed or referred. The financial and material resources are exhausted. They're non-existent. The enthusiasm and energy of the leadership has waned or is diminished. There's no one willing to provide leadership, continued leadership. The volunteer stream for accomplishing work has evaporated. Many of the organizations and agencies are no longer participating. There was an end time set when the group got started, and it has been reached. So, ask yourself the question, are we there yet? The leadership plans and conducts a final evaluation of the work of the group. When the group sees the cases it has are going to be assisted to the best of its ability within the available resources, or that they are transferred to other agencies. As you plan to complete an evaluation of your work, consider looking at these things. The evaluation might occur at a retreat facilitated by a trusted individual. It could include evaluations that are solicited by email or by mail, regular mail. It should involve the members of the LTRG and staff. Also, look to those who are external to the group. Input from clients, donors, community residents, LTRG partners, FEMA and state VALs, state and local emergency management. It should examine how the mission, goals, and objectives of the LTRG were maintained and accomplished. It may consider how the group will reactivate for the next disaster, or whether there will be related work to be done in the future. Or during evaluation and end of evaluation, it celebrates and reports the recovery story to the entire community. Now, this report contains measurable resources received, how were they used, clients served, etc. Stories of the recovery process, adjustments needed along the way, and a summary of best practices in response as well as recovery. As you consider making provisions to maintain appropriate materials, review such materials and documents and determine how to secure them. Documents such as statements of your mission, goals, and the objectives, and whether they were accomplished. Your final evaluation, the cases transferred or referred to other agencies or the ones that have been closed, documentation of your celebration of accomplishments, your final audits, inventory of tools and equipments, reports that were compiled and distributed to the long-term recovery groups, to the community, to the media, to the stakeholders, to funders. A lot of information and materials. Remaining assets that will be held for the next disaster, or the ones that have been liquidated, records that have been gathered and storing them. These records could include the financial records, the employee and client records, letters of agreements, accidents reports, reports of volunteers, and other pertinent documents. Consider how to store them. Consider using the most current technological way of storing data if you have the ability to do so, including considering storing in laptops, computers dedicated to recovery operation, flash drives, virtual storage, the clouds, and other types of storage. But make sure there is some provision to maintain those materials. The LTRG, while looking at the future, realizes that often communication and collaboration among community agencies is an outcome of the work done by the LTRG. And many communities want to see that that communication and collaboration is maintained. During the recovery process, the group may have developed expertise in different areas. And the benefits of the community may include whether there is or what are the reduced vulnerability factors, what kind of closed gaps have been made in the services that have been provided, or how have you closed some gaps in the services, what is the increased mitigation and resiliency factors in the community, has the community leadership been prepared well enough and educated for future disasters? What about the timely and coordinated response for large and small disasters? I do apologize that the dog has reared his head during this webinar. Sorry about that. What about the strengthened community ties and how that has come about in the fabric of the community across class and culture and ethnicity, employment, education, and any other values that reside within the community. Part of what has happened is that there is or should be more communication among agencies in the community that has helped build trust. That communication certainly needs to continue. As the LTRG has done its work, they have rehabbed and rebuilt homes in such a way that the homes are better able to stand the next storm. As case managers have worked with families and helped them recover, next time should not be the same. It should be better. As a result of the disaster and work with those impacted, the community has identified gaps in services and has worked to improve those services available to the community. Consider those services listed on this slide, whether it's volunteer management, whether it's assisting with other benefits, advantages for different community residents. While bouncing back as a result of the work of the recovery group, usually the community is better prepared to face the next disaster. And the community wants to keep building that resiliency. For those of you who have just worked on this disaster or did so some time back, do you remember how you felt in the days immediately following the disaster? Everything was overwhelming. A bunch of strangers came to town to talk to you about long-term recovery, and you wondered what that was and if the community knew how to do that. And you probably encountered some of us as Church World Service emergency response specialists. Funds and donations have been secured. Case managers have worked with clients. Construction and volunteer management has happened. You may have been able to organize all of these, or you may not have been able to organize all of these, or just maybe some. But don't you know a lot more than you did when you first got started? When is it time to wind down? You might be tired. Volunteers and resources are running thin. Agencies have returned to their normal work, and nearly everything that you can do for clients has been done. So rejoice in the fact that individuals and families have recovered and are moving on with their new normal. But before we can truly celebrate, there are essential considerations related to drawing the response to a close. And this is just a review of some listed earlier. Ask yourselves these questions. Are the stated mission goals and objectives accomplished in accordance with bylaws? Has the final evaluation been completed? Have cases been transferred or referred to other agencies, or are they closed? Are we celebrating, or have we celebrated the accomplishments? Have there been, or are you planning for a financial audit? Has there been inventory of tools and equipment? Have you compiled, or are you compiling and distributing a report of the long-term recovery group, the community, the media, stakeholders, funders? What are you doing with the remaining assets or the records gathered and stored, including those that are listed here? Questions. Barry, it's time for us to take a break here and see if we have any questions.
Okay, we do have several, or two at this point. The first one is based on your introduction about what Church World Service does, and the question is, what kind of help do you provide to asylum seekers? And the Immigration and Refugee Program within Church World Service cares for about 8,000 people per year that are coming to the United States as refugees through the State Department. Other agencies do this as well, such as Catholic Charities and other faith-based and secular organizations. But about 8,000 refugees come to the United States through the aid of Church World Service. And what we do is find congregations within the Church World Service denominations that will host those refugees, help them to find housing, help them to find language training, employment, schools, and all the things to establish their new life as new people and immigrants to the United States. So we work with, and those people are refugees coming from countries where they've had to leave their homes and cannot go back because of dangers they may face, or they've worked with, perhaps they've worked with the U.S. military in the past and therefore are no longer able to stay in the country that they're in, a variety of reasons. But in a nutshell, we help about 8,000 per year refugees to get settled, and some of them may be political asylum. I can't answer that question for sure, but would love to talk to you perhaps in a little more detail on that one. So if you want to give me an email, Donald, please do. Okay, the question for you, Sandra. Do you work with VOADs?
Yes, we do. Church World Service is very involved with the VOADs, and we, in a lot of most of our active states, we are members of the local and state VOADs, and we participate with them very frequently. Just to give you an example, I reside actually in Region 4, and Region 4 has a quarterly call with all of the state VOADs in the region, and we're having one next week. And Church World Service always appears on that agenda to provide updates as well as information. So we are continuously involved with most of our state and in some instances local VOADs. Does that answer the question?
I think so. The only thing I might add is if you are a VOAD and you're looking for help and understanding of some of the things you might want to be doing, please call any of us, but preferably the specialist in your region. But you can work with Suzanne, Sandra, or I, and give us a call, and we can help you work through some of the long-term recovery process. We like to know about as many VOADs as possible because when disaster happens, we're going to be seeking you out to find ways that we can help your community. Okay, a question we often get: do you have written slides and/or documents with the information presented under each heading? And this comes from Sandy. Sandy, and I know the 155 other people are asking this same question. The slides in a PowerPoint form will be posted within about 48 to 72 hours to cwsglobal.org, and we will also be posting a recording of the webinar as it's being presented today by Sandra. So again, go to www.cwsglobal.org late Thursday or on Friday, and we should have that information posted at our website. Okay, and then we have one that is not a question, but it's a statement, and I think it's worth saying and repeating to all. This is, of course, a statement, not a question. Following the 2011-2012 tornado season in Hamilton County, Tennessee, we transitioned our LTRG into a spontaneous, unaffiliated volunteer committee. We have adopted the Florida volunteer model for volunteer reception centers, and we meet at least quarterly. We execute a full-scale exercise annually and have agreements with a number of faith-based organizations for use of their facilities for volunteer reception centers. We believe this will allow us to stand up another LTRG at a moment's notice while performing a valuable service to the community with volunteer management. That absolutely sums up what we would hope happens to all long-term recovery groups, that they become an organization that can prepare their community for the future. I had a question about where are sustainment grant applications available. Those are available for long-term recovery groups that are active in a disaster as funds permit with us. And contact me or contact the emergency response specialist from the state at the emails that were given earlier. Okay, question, Sandra. Is the recovery tool and training workshop available to anybody?
Generally, the Recovery Tools and Training Workshop is available within the community that has requested it, and those who want to know how to get started, how to work within the long-term recovery system and operation are invited and extended an invitation to attend, but the invitation comes through your local community where we're providing the recovery tools and training.
Okay, and I might add to that, the long-term recovery tools and training is a one-day workshop involving Church World Service representatives and representatives from 4 or 5 other organizations, and usually done in the community 4 to 6 to 8 weeks after a disaster, depending on the circumstances. And anybody in the community is normally welcome and invited to come to those. But if you're a long-term recovery group or a VOAD looking to gain more knowledge about the basics of long-term recovery, again, go to our website and you'll find previous versions of the long-term recovery basics webinar listed there that can give you great insight and a start to understanding how to be organized to better prepare your community for a disaster. That's it for questions at this point, Sandra.
Thank you. Those are some good questions, and especially the information shared with us about the transitioning of the long-term recovery group in Tennessee. How does the long-term recovery group decide what to do next? Some of the questions and thoughts might come about is, what are the future disaster risks? Will the mission goals and objectives change? Are there continued recovery unmet needs in your community? Are resources available to support an amended mission? And will they be forthcoming? What stakeholders are available for continued communication and collaboration and coordination and cooperation, the 4 C's we commonly refer to in the VOAD world? What impacts have been made on the community's resilience? What additional mitigation practices can be put in place? Is there a capacity to keep the LTRG functioning? Is there a need for advocacy, community development? Who else is doing preparedness, education, and training? These are all types of questions that you might want to ask before you decide or start moving toward transitioning. The above considerations that we just talked about and answers to those questions are the basis for future planning. Information might be brought to a retreat. We talked about the evaluation process, or other forums where major concerns and ongoing needs can emerge. The group certainly will identify the best practices and allow ideas to take shape as they go through the same kind of decision-making process as when the LTRG first formed. As decisions are made about the future, the group will want to make this certainly a collaborative effort. And additional things are to consider is who will provide the leadership? How will the community be informed? What is the process to re-enter the recovery mode when another disaster happens? It is important that the long-term recovery group plan for a way to share what it has learned about the community and the recovery process in preparation for the next disaster. Anytime there is a transition, we all recognize that challenges and opportunities do arise. There are differing of opinions about the direction. We find that there's leadership fatigue, and people are exhausted. People lose that collective memory that has been built. There are limited resources, and funding will play a key factor in whatever the group future will be. But these are questions and decisions that have to be made. I want to suggest to you that there are several options, for you to consider in terms of transitioning after the long-term recovery. Those examples are maintaining the LTRG for a future disaster, transitioning to a mitigation organization in order to reduce the vulnerability and increase resiliency, transitioning to a local VOAD or COAD to do disaster preparedness and training, transitioning to do other social service work, or, as I may have said earlier, saying the mission is accomplished and just closing down the organization. Deciding on another option might be needed if there are some additional needs in the community. But these are possible options. When we talk about maintaining the long-term recovery group for the future, this may be done in conjunction with or alongside some of the other options and makes starting the recovery process after the next disaster easier. Some of the activities that would help to make sure the LTRG was ready for the next disaster is an annually review of the recovery plan and update it as needed. Maintain communication with quarterly or semi-annual or annual meetings. Maintain relationships. Do a special project. Define your relationships with the citizen core groups if you have them in your community. And strengthen your relationship with emergency management. What about transitioning to mitigation and or disaster education? This option is helpful to the community, and it has significant problems that are likely to be exacerbated by future disasters. Mitigation and disaster education help reduce the vulnerabilities and increase the resilience of the community. The LTRG has developed the processes which can be applied to other areas and has the relationships that can encourage advocacy in key areas. Develop a housing resource center. A housing development corporation might be some plans. Establish or collaborate with affordable housing task force. Evaluating the hazards. Trying to reduce the level of poverty in the community. Maintain the relationships. Strengthen relationships again with emergency management. Participate in hazard mitigation programs and other participating processes that occur or forums that occur within your local planning community. A COAD or VOAD can be the result of your transition. The option is valuable because it is able to broaden and strengthen the relationships between organizations and agencies and communities, allowing them to be better prepared to offer services in all of the phases of the disaster cycle. The local regional VOAD or COAD is also related to the state VOAD and through them to the national VOAD. Somebody asked the question about how active we are. We are very active. This gives communities more access to resources that can be supportive in the case of a future disaster. A VOAD or COAD can assist in developing relationships with emergency management and defining the relationship with citizen core. It can have the opportunity to share experiences with other communities and create an environment that assists in anticipating and preparing for response and recovery from hazards in the community. Other activities that result from a COAD or VOAD include developing a written recovery plan, holding tabletop exercises, conducting cross-training among and between agencies. Just today on a Georgia VOAD call, the President asked that members of the VOAD join in training of other organizations because they do different things. This could be something that does happen and is a valuable tool within the COAD or the VOAD. Develop geographic information systems, mapping the assets of the community, maintaining other relationships, and contacting the appropriate state VOADs within your communities. If you would like further information about COADs and VOADs, please visit our website for the webinar we presented last fall on what is a COAD. As the LTRG has done the recovery work, significant gaps, as I had indicated earlier, have been identified in the social service sector of the community. And since those have been identified, the skills and experience of the long-term recovery group could be utilized to develop ways to bridge those gaps and to advocate on behalf of the most vulnerable within the community. Looking at community relations, coalitions in the community, comprehensive case management organization, or special projects within the community. Some groups, as another option, have decided that they will do recovery only for a particular disaster. They may hold a celebration of the accomplishments, but when the next disaster occurs, a new group will plan and be developed. A plan for maintaining lessons learned should be implemented so that it can be shared with a new group that may form following the next disaster. Celebrate accomplishments, thank leadership, volunteers, staff, and others. Notify the community of the closure. Close organization in accordance with the bylaws. Safely store documentations in accordance with IRS regulations and any other regulations. Liquidate the assets in accordance with IRS regulations. File final reports in accordance with state and federal law. Be creative. All of the options have worked in different communities around the country, but there are organizations which have tried all of the models and have been successful. Whether or not they will work in your community will depend on the answers to the earlier questions we asked. Time, energy, leadership, resources, advocacy, and funding are all key issues to be considered as the long-term recovery groups makes a decision to carry out the new or revised mission, goal, and objectives of the long-term recovery group. So we ask ourselves, who, what, where, why, when, and how. This completes our information we wanted to share with you today. And before we can sign off, here is our contact information. We hope that Church World Service can continue to be a resource for you. Please visit our website or contact me or my colleagues. Additional resources we have highlighted here. These are some that you might want to familiarize yourself with, and they can be an asset for you. And now, Barry, if we have more questions, we have just a few minutes to respond to those questions.
Okay, we do have several. One I missed earlier. Is the recovery tools and is recovery tools and training workshop available to anyone? I answered that, but there was a question as to whether it would be presented or what training would be presented. And I want to take this opportunity to tell everybody that we will be doing a webinar on emotional and spiritual care on February 10th. So put that in your calendars, and our guest speaker will be Reverend Mary Hughes Gadro from Oklahoma, who's had lots of experience in recent years with emotional and spiritual care, and she's an expert in the field. So February 10th for that webinar. Sandra, what happens if a community experiences back-to-back disasters a year apart? Does the original LTRG transition into a new LTRG for the larger disaster, or does it continue as a separate and parallel entity?
Well, that's going to be depend upon the community and what the leadership decides to do. I think it has been done in both instances. One, I've seen it done where it rolls into the recovery effort that's already going on, because in some instances, some of the same communities have been affected by the previous disaster. Or the community can choose to start up another long-term recovery group. We must realize that in a lot of instances we promote coming together as a community, having a centralized way of recovering or assisting families to recover. But we have sometimes more than one long-term recovery group in communities recovering from the same disaster.
Barry, this is Suzanne. I may want to add something to the question that Timothy asked. We also plan on having a long-term recovery overview scheduled for further into the spring. As we know, that's when the flooding usually occurs, or we have tornado season. And once you have been registered for one of our webinars, we keep you on a distribution list. So we will certainly also send you information out on our upcoming webinars. I just wanted to add that to that question Tim had.
Okay. Thank you, Suzanne. That's good to add. Another question. What advice would you give to groups looking to having a standing resource for disaster case management, especially for unfunded disasters that are not federally declared?
Okay. What advice? Give me that question again.
Okay. What advice would you give to groups looking to have a standing resource for disaster case management, especially for undeclared disasters or unfunded disasters that are not federally declared?
If the community chooses to do so, what you would do is continue to work together with the various agencies to define how you can develop a disaster case management for your community, and determine who can provide resources within your community to develop that standing disaster case management. I know there are communities and there are states who have come up with their own disaster recovery, their disaster case management plan, so that in the event there is not a federally funded case management program, individual agencies, organizations, churches, and so forth will stand up disaster case management. So it could be a subgroup of your VOAD or your COAD, or you could, as I said earlier in the presentation, that's a gap in services that you might want to try to address and come up with a disaster case management plan for your community.
Okay, I think that's the last question, Sandra.
Thank you. We appreciate your attendance at this webinar, and again, we will host our next webinar on, is that February 10th? February the 10th on spiritual and emotional care, and we look forward to many of you joining us for that webinar.